So, this is our podcast. I'm Mark Wingfield,
Kevin Kastning.
and we thought we'd talk this time about the album which we've just finished, which is called, I can't
the line,
remember.
the line to three.
That's it, The Line to Three. We've only just finished it and come up with names and things. Although I have to say, Kevin's the one that really came up with the names because you're so good at coming up with names. But it's just been finished mixing and mastering, and it's gone off to be pressed. So we thought we'd have a chat about how we did it, why we did it, the way we did it, and that sort of thing.
And maybe point out that today you're coming to us from somewhere in England, and I'm somewhere in the U.S. in Massachusetts.
That's right. I live about 40 minutes out of London in the countryside, and you live even further out in the countryside,
Further away from London as
and
well.
even further away from London. Yeah,
So this record was different in several ways for us, right? With uh, soundscapes being the kind of the key,
mm,
and
yeah,
use use of piano on a lot of pieces as well.
yeah, yeah. Which was, yeah, a first for us. Uh,
So
so,
the
yeah.
soundscapes were your ideas. How did you arrive at that idea?
Well, I wanted to do something different. I think we discussed before the session that we wanted to try and do something different each time we do a record, and I certainly really like trying to push into new territory every time I do any album. So I was thinking around, well, what could we do that was different? What would I find interesting and sort of inspiring in a different way? And we've done all kinds of different approaches to our previous albums, using inspiration from composers like the when we did inspired by Elliot Carter, and we've done things around artwork like the Vermeer inspired album, and various other things like that which we haven't necessarily mentioned on the album we've used. And I thought, what could we do would be different this time? So I remembered this album by Jan Gabarek that I think he recorded in the late 70s called Dis, D-I-S. And I haven't heard it in a long time. So my memory of it was faint, and I could have listened to it, but I almost didn't want to because I just wanted to take that memory I had of it and go with that. And what I remembered about it was that he had these alien wind harps that had been recorded, and that sound
Right.
was in the background, and he played over that sound. And there were like sheets of sound, from what I remember, and this is the bit I'm not sure about. From what in my memory, they were non-tonal sounds. They were like they didn't
Very
have
textural.
textural rather than harmonic. And I thought that would be a great idea to do something like that and play with something that was appearing and disappearing, not just like in the sound picture, but actually, in space as well, moving around in space, be back behind us and creating a big kind of space. And I think I saw the whole thing in my mind as a kind of a big landscape kind of a feel.
Mhm.
At least before we record anything, that's kind of where I was coming from. So I found a way which we will keep as you said, it's a trade secret as to how I came up with these sounds. And then when we got to the studio, we did a bunch more. I turned up with a bunch of them, and then we did a bunch more, which actually you played percussion, and we then treated that to create a different kind of soundscape from those as well.
Right. The soundscapes, I thought, actually became like a third member. It was almost like it was a trio instead of
Yeah,
just a.
yeah, and that worked really well. I thought it created a different place for us to be within, the space within the music, as well as the actual sonic space of kind of front to back sound stage kind of
Right.
space.
And I think it really forced us into a different compositionally structured direction than
Mm.
than would have been possible without that.
Yeah, yeah. It sent us off into a different direction, which is good, and which is the kind of idea. And I really didn't know whether it would work before we tried it. You know, I was fully prepared for it to have been a disaster or a non-starter, and then we just tried and just thought, no, that doesn't work. But no, it worked really well.
Yeah, really.
So yeah, I was pleased with how that worked. And then the other thing, of course, that we did, which was really different from anything we've done before together, was you playing piano.
Right.
So
I'm playing piano on 4 of the 9 tracks, actually.
yeah. So what was it that made you decide to play piano? I don't think I knew you were going to play piano before we started. Maybe you'd
I
mentioned
didn't
it.
either.
No, I guess
No,
not. Yeah.
no, I hadn't planned on it. I hadn't even thought of it. But then once we started working with the soundscapes, it just became this other texture. And I thought that piano would provide a whole entirely other texture that we
Mm,
hadn't tried before.
mm,
I didn't know it was going to work, but I thought just the juxtaposition of your unique electric guitar voice against an acoustic grand piano voice was just having those two textures together in and of itself was really beautiful. And I would never try to pass myself off as a pianist. So trying to create textures, environments, instead of approaching it like a piano, it just forces me into an entirely different place than any of
mm.
the guitar instruments I usually play.
Yeah. And my feeling was that it worked really well with the piano. I mean, as soon as we started playing together, I immediately thought, "Wow, this is really good." And although you know are not a pianist as such in a pianistic kind of way, you are clearly capable of playing exactly what you want to hear. And I felt that what you did in those sessions in those tracks was to use the piano as a kind of a composing tool, really, almost in place of an orchestral idea. And I felt that worked incredibly well. So harmonically, you were just creating exactly what you wanted to hear.
Right.
And I almost, it almost would have gotten in the way if you were doing pianistic stuff, I think, in terms of the
Yeah,
approach you were taking and the approach the music was taking. So I thought it worked extremely well.
thank you. I was pleasantly surprised with how it turned out as well.
Mm.
Yeah.
I wish I was similarly
And
capable of doing that on the piano, but unfortunately, I'm not.
you
Hmm.
like harmonic with layered guitars in the studio as well.
Sorry, I didn't hear that bit. It cut out.
You were doing different layered harmonic environments from guitar as well.
Yeah, I was on some of the tracks, and just to distinguish that in terms of soundscapes, because that's a kind of a soundscape as well. When we were talking before about the soundscapes, we were talking about the sounds in the background. Sometimes they would come to the foreground as well, which were non-tonal music, non-musical, non-note sounds, not like chords or
Right.
anything. And the sounds I
Well,
was making were chords sustaining behind us, which is something I've been working with for a long time, as you know, and have used on some of our previous albums and other albums of mine, where it's been an interest of mine for many years because I was always frustrated by the kinds of voicings that were possible to do on the guitar, or certainly on a 6-string guitar. And the only way to really get those to happen was to do something a bit like a sustain pedal on a piano, where I could play single notes and they would carry on sustaining, and I could then build up a chord by selectively sustaining certain notes out of the single note lines I was playing. And so I have been doing that for quite a while, and I've just recently developed some new ways of doing that. Technology has come along that's allowed that, through software and using a laptop, to just do many more varieties of doing that. Basically using a similar method to doing it as I was before. but just, yeah, more complicated. I mean, originally I was feeding my guitar into a very long reverb, and then I would put the reverb on infinite sustain. And now I'm doing a much more complex signal chain with lots of a mixture of reverb and delays and pitch shifting and granular. I'd say granular synthesis because that's what it's called, but it's It isn't really. There's no synth involved. It just granular plugin will take the sound and kind of break it up and reposition parts of it in time, and those can be cross-faded and mangled, and many different things can happen with it. So that's just one of a whole range of different software tools I'm using to create soundscapes, which are the same idea. They are created by single notes that I play, but building a much more kind of orchestral, without trying to sound like real orchestra in any way, but orchestral sound in the sense that it's got some very low register things happening and very high register things happening. So there's actually things happening higher and significantly higher and lower than I've actually played, sometimes 2 or 3 octaves below what I played, and sometimes a couple of octaves above what I've played, and that sustains, but also kind of changes, and that's what I wasn't getting with the older methods, which would be quite static sound. These sounds are kind of changing subtly the whole time, which I like. Yeah, so there's some of that going on as well. And I also have some new sounds in my single note playing behind my guitar sound, which sound a bit like a synth, but they're not. There's no synth on this record. In fact, I've very rarely used any synth on any of our records. I think a couple of times I've used synth along with my guitar, but generally speaking I'm not using it, and on this I'm not using any synth. It's all done with software based on my guitar sound, and there's just a lot more things that can now be done, which are great.
Yeah, I thought it was really effective. It sounded
Thanks.
really great on the record.
Good. So you didn't use your 36 string at all on this record. Why is that?
No. That's been my main instrument since I got it like 3 years ago, that I've used, on every record date since I've gotten it. And I had it right there in the rack. I had planned on using it on this record project. But once I got to hearing, what you were doing with your kind of layered guitar atmospheric things and also the soundscapes, I felt like the 15-string extended classical provided like more of a juxtaposition against that. I felt like the 36 would have blended in and maybe gotten kind of swallowed up in that atmosphere.
Yeah.
Whereas the 15-string extended classical really has its own voice that really was another palette of colors placed against either the soundscapes or what you were doing.
That was a great texture, I thought, in the soundscape context.
Thanks. Yeah, I thought it really spoke well against it. And then I used the 30-string contra alto guitar on some other pieces for kind of the same reason. It has, the alto range, plus the tuning I was using. It really cut through a lot of that really thick orchestral background. So it just worked out that way. I really hadn't planned on not using the 36. Just thought for the pieces we were doing and the things we were creating, it just really, those two instruments really fit ideally.
Yeah. So, and I think just the maybe the final bit of the picture in terms of the album for me was the mixing approach, which was an extension, I think, of what we've done before. It wasn't like radically different, but I felt because of the soundscapes and to some degree because of the piano, it was nice to create an even more space, more front to back soundstage. Depth is a word that's used a lot at the moment in mixing and music, and it seems to mean many different things depending on who talks about it. But when I talk about depth, I'm talking about the distance from, if you listen to stereo speakers, it's hard to tell on headphones because you don't get the same effect, but with speakers, if they're correctly positioned, you get a very nice stereo picture, but also you get things which are right up at the front near you and things which are really far back. and the better the sound system you have, the more distance it's capable of producing.
More of a like,
But in terms of distance from front to back, yeah. But that's also that distance comes from how the music is mixed or how it's recorded. And in this case, it was because we were recording. We were, if you record something in a place with a lot of ambience and mics positioned in different distances, it can come from that. But we were recording an electric instrument from my point of view, which has obviously none of that, and you were fairly close mic'd, so that distance was coming from the mixing approach, and to some degree the soundscape sounds as well, which had quite a lot of front to back going on.
right,
And I thought that worked out quite well. And it was kind of, in a way, almost part of the concept of the record, for me at least, because of the soundscapes.
right.
And in a way, the piano kind of did that too for some reason. I don't know why. It seemed to fit that too.
Yeah, and at the same time, your direct signal is in stereo, and I'm mic'd in stereo, and the
Mm.
piano was in stereo. So there's just a big, like a much broader, I think, stereo field and front to back sound stage
Mm.
than we've had
Yeah,
previous records.
yeah, yeah. I think that also partly comes from your more recent instruments, because they're so stereo. I mean, they are literally stereo instruments, acoustically stereo instruments,
Yeah, they really are.
which I know is part of the whole design, an idea you had with them from the outset, and they really do and project a stereo image, and that means that the whole thing can take on a different approach mix wise, whereas before, it was pretty much, you were in a sense a mono instrument before you had these new instruments,
Right.
and so it made sense for me to kind of not be mono, but us to be kind of more separated. Here's me, here's you. Whereas now you pretty much cover the whole sound left to right state field anyway. So
Hmm.
in a way, we don't have to be separated in that way. And the piano similarly kept the piano pan very wide because your other instruments are wide, and so it seemed to just fit the whole sound of the thing nicely.
Yeah, I
Yeah.
thought. Yeah, and we should also mention that there were the soundscapes that you created and recorded and brought into the sessions. And then once we were in the studio, we also recorded some in the
Mm.
studio with me playing percussion, and then you did some treatments on those.
Yeah,
And then that set of recordings and played over those as soundscapes as well.
that's right. So there's two sets of soundscapes, one I brought and one that we created actually in the studio. Yeah, which was nice because it was just a different approach and more less. The percussive ones are less of a kind of washy moving thing and more of a kind of contained uh, contained sounds. Yeah.
But still bringing the kind of the effect of a third person with them.
Yeah, yeah, and I used a similar processing chain on those because I wanted to have a similar effect, but different at the same time.
Yeah, no, it sounded really.
Yeah, I was really pleased with it. I thought the whole thing worked well, and it was gratifying for me because it was, it's always an unknown when we go into the studio together because of the way we both approach it. The kind of music that we do together is spontaneous and we don't plan anything musically. We might plan some um, almost conceptual approaches, but we won't plan any of the music. And this was the same as always. I mean, even though the soundscapes were pre-recorded, everything we played in terms of instruments was all played live in the studio, and we didn't do any overdubs or anything else as usual. But what I liked, which was different, was that the whole kind of process, including the soundscapes before and after the session of making the soundscapes and the mixing, was all it was all kind of unknown in a funny kind of way. It didn't know any of it was going to kind of work. Didn't know what was going to happen really before, and then we just put it all together and it worked really nicely. It's not as if those other elements were improvised as such, but they were similarly kind of unknown and unplanned in a way, which I kind of liked the way it yeah, it worked.
Yeah, I had a good feeling about it. Like when you
Yeah.
started talking about it, I thought, yeah, I think that's going to work pretty well. I didn't know what to expect. I didn't know exactly what you were putting together, and I didn't quite know how it was going to all come together. But I thought it was I thought it was really effective, and I just had a sense going in that it was going to be like a really successful other direction for us.
Yeah, I hoped it would. I really wanted it to kind of do something and push us in a different direction, and it did. It really worked from that point of view, and
Yeah,
I'm glad it worked because I I had these ideas for the sounds in my head. I knew what I wanted them to sound like, and um, the original sound source, which I won't divulge for trade secret reasons, didn't sound really how I wanted it to sound. So I had to do a lot of processing, and I gradually worked it, moved it over to where I wanted it to be, and eventually I got it. Like, yeah, okay, that is the sound I was imagining. So I was kind of pleased that A, that I got that to happen, and that B, that it worked the way I kind of hoped it would work.
yeah. No, I thought you did a great job with it,
No, thanks.
and I'm, like you, I don't ever want to record the same record twice.
Yeah,
And I thought this one was just another step forward and away from things we've done in the past. Not to take away from any of those records, but it just feels right to just keep changing
yeah,
and
yeah.
moving and essentially challenging ourselves at the same time.
Yeah, absolutely. That's what I like, and I like doing something different every time, and I like trying to push myself into new areas that I don't know. That makes it interesting for me, and also it forces me to do something different. And I don't like repeating myself or doing a kind of better version of what I did before or anything like that. I much prefer to try and find something new. Um, and this worked, and everything we've done has been an attempt on our parts to try to do that, hasn't it? I mean, we've always come up with what can we use on this one. We used the previous album, we used the Vermeer paintings as an inspiration, and then a couple before that we used the inspiration from Elliot Carter, and I think on most of them we've used something or other. Certainly on the recent ones we've used one thing or another as a kind of a conceptual thing, to pivot on, or to push us into something different. So it's a matter of
Right.
what are we going to do for the next one now, Kevin? You
I
have to
know.
think of something.
Well, fortunately, like the next two in the can already, so we've got a while to
Actually,
think about it.
that's true.
Uh,
We do, yeah, because we got a lot. We recorded a lot on that session, enough for another, more than one other album, and then we got the previous one, which hasn't been released yet. Yeah,
I feel like when we, force ourselves into a different situation, it's for me, it's not only just making sure I don't repeat anything I've done previously, but it's just a real learning and growth experience for me
yeah, me
because I
too.
always I come out of it a different musician than when I went in,
Yeah,
and that's just a really valuable process for me.
yeah, that's exactly the same for me. Absolutely. Yeah, that's one of the things I like about it, or any piece of music which I feel has really worked and been worthwhile. I usually come out the other end of it, I hope, a better musician. I'll certainly will have learned things from it,
Yeah,
and then
right.
that's always a good thing for me. Yeah, absolutely, it's part of what I feel is the process in a way. The artistic process for me is partly that. Yeah,
And I've been in, and this is probably true for you as well, but I've been in recording situations or putting together new material for a record where you're working with somebody and you suggest a direction or a concept
mm.
and they're not they're not quite willing to go there.
Mm.
But one thing I've been grateful for with our collaboration is that we've never said no to each other. Like no matter what we come to those recording sessions, when we bring some prepared concept, like we're
Yeah,
always ready to go with it. And I think that is a really successful workflow for us.
absolutely. And I think you have to be prepared to take risks and fail. You know, if it
Right.
worked every time and you knew it was going to work, it wouldn't be a risk. And risks are where a lot of the interesting stuff happens for me. And if you're going to take a risk by definition, that's not going to work every time. And I think we both feel that that's part of the process. And if we try something and it doesn't work, that's fine too. We try something else
Yeah.
then. Okay, good. Let's do this then. And I agree with you. Some musicians that I've played with, they don't want to take risks really. Even jazz musicians, surprisingly, a surprising number of them don't want to take a risk, and you try to do something a little bit too left field or a bit different, and they make it very clear that they don't want to go there. They want to go here where they
Where the,
know and where they're
yeah,
comfortable, and yeah, that's fine to do sometimes. But I personally, I get bored just always doing that, and I like to, yeah,
yeah. And I don't
like
think
to
there's
take risks
any.
and see what else can happen. What could be potential? You know, the potential almost in the ether of what could be there if you go and search for it and try to pull something out, or you have an idea or a concept or something in the back of your mind. You just think, I think there's something there to be kind of some music to be pulled out of the air. I can feel it, and you know, but you don't know exactly what it is until you go and find it and do it, and then you discover it as you do it, kind of thing.
Yeah, it's just part of a sort of an evolutionary process for me.
Hmm.
It's ways that I find growth and expansion, and that kind of music that you're describing. It's kind of the only way to access that kind of music.
Yeah. Yeah. Absolutely. Yeah.
Well, should we sign off on this one?
Let's sign off on this one. I think that was covers the album pretty neatly.
In
So,
case anybody's listening, the release date for that is May 30th, 2017. The Line to Three on Grey Disc Records.
and I hope everybody enjoys it. And until next time, bye.